Yep, okay, great. So good morning, everybody. Welcome to the OCLC Research Update, and also good morning to anybody who's joining us on Facebook Live. And as you come into the room, just welcome to find an empty seat. So I am Sharon Streams. I am the director of Web Junction, which is a program of OCLC Research, and I'm joined today by Andrew Pace, Executive Director of Technical Research, yes, and Karen Smith-Yoshimura, Senior Program Officer with the Research Library Partnership. And so we're going to talk about a number of things today. I'm just going to give a highlight of a number of projects and activities that are underway or recently completed, and then I'm going to turn over to Andrew and Karen, who are going to do a deeper dive into some of our work around linked data. And I just wanted to get started by just giving a quick few words about OCLC Research overall. And this is our purpose statement, and that's to scale and accelerate learning, innovation, and collaboration. And how we do this is by exploring a whole range of areas that affect both libraries and librarianship overall. And that includes the aggregation and mining and expansion and description of bibliographic data, managing and leveraging the collective collection, resource sharing, user studies, library in the life of the digital user, research information management, research data management, how public libraries are catalysts in their communities, online learning networks, and really more. And that sounds like a lot, but also the unifying factor among all of that is operating as libraries operating a networked environment. And we're particularly interested in how sharing and cooperation can happen through those networks, and which is also the founding principles of OCLC. So learning, innovation, and collaboration at scale through networks. We put a printed piece out on the seat here. It's the OCLC Research Update. So this has just brief recaps of the outputs and activities. And this is published each quarter, so this is quite new. And pretty much all of these, if most or all of these collaborations include working with partners, which could be academic libraries, archives, library support organizations, and other nonprofit organizations. So like I said, I'm going to highlight a few of those projects. And here are three of our most recent reports. These are all available free download on our research website. The first one is the realities of research data management, and this is actually a 4-part series. And it looks at the context, influences, and choices that research universities face in building or acquiring RDM capacity. So this has been an area of ongoing exploration for our research group, and you're going to continue to see activities that are going to be built upon this research series. The next one is an exploration of the Irish presence in the published network. And this is a demonstration about how a national presence can be separated out of the broader published record for study to gain a better understanding of how a country's contribution and influence in literature, scholarship, and ideas. So the report analyzes WorldCat data about works published in Ireland, created by Irish people and or about Ireland, and it reveals how the Irish presence is known and perceived throughout the world. And finally, there's the many faces of digital visitors and residents. This research challenges the common assumption that younger people prefer to conduct research in a digital space, while older people rely on physical sources for information. The study showed that while younger participants reported a high reliance on human sources, faculty, researchers, and scholars, reported that the highest also reported, and scholars are who reported the highest use of digital sources. And furthermore, participants chose technology based more on convenience and social context than whether it was the best tool for the job. So really interesting reading with implications. Do check it out. And speaking of the digital information space, OCLC is in the final year of a 3-year collaboration with the University of Florida and Rutgers School of Communication and Information. This has been a IMLS-funded project titled Researching Students' Information Choices, Determining Identity and Judging Credibility in the Digital Spaces. And this research team is led by the co-PIs Lynn Conaway and Ishel Faniel. And back in 2007, Williams and Rowland published a literature review about the information behavior of young people. And a key conclusion was that the Google generation are format agnostic and have little interest in the containers for the content. Containers meaning like books, reports, chapters, encyclopedia entries. They went on to say that this area is still wide open and a hugely important issue for libraries and publishers. So motivated by this conclusion and our work in the user research study area, we posed these research questions that you see here. Do STEM students differentiate among different types of digital resources at the point of selection? And how do STEM students determine the credibility of digital resources? So this project was launched in December 2015, and it's focused on students in science, technology, engineering, and math, so STEM disciplines. There were 6 cohorts of a total of 176 participants that include students ranging from grade 4 all the way through grad school, including cohorts of grades 4-5, grades 6 through 8, grades 9 through 12, community college, undergraduate, and graduate programs. And some of the questions that were asked of these students included, where do you usually use the internet? Have you asked a librarian for help with a research project? Do you think it's important to know whether the online information is from a book, journal, blog, newspaper, etc.? And how confident do you feel in selecting online information for research projects? So the team has finished the data collection and has completed a preliminary analysis of some data. The analysis and presentation of the findings are continuing throughout the rest of the project, the rest of this year. You can stay tuned at the project website. The short URL is listed here. But here's just a little brief clip from that analysis, and this is around that question about confidence. So how confident do you feel in selecting online information for research projects? Which shows, and you can see it's divided between adults and K through 12, and you can see that they're in the pretty confident range, the majority. But there's some implications that have been drawn from this analysis that despite the students' level of confidence, they still need digital literacy instruction to understand what they're looking at online in terms of its container. They don't really know what the source is and whether it's peer-reviewed. And also, website usability is a challenge for students who are very familiar with the simplicity of the Google search box, and marketing and branding of online sources available through the library is needed, especially for sources that are not accessible through the open web. Okay, and staying a little bit on the users in the digital space, we've just completed our 18-month project that was Wikipedia plus libraries better together. I've talked about this on the last several research updates. We trained hundreds of mostly public library staff on the inner workings of Wikipedia and how to leverage the online encyclopedia for community program and for information literacy and researching skills. I'd like to just thank the generous funding from the Knight Foundation and the WikiMedia Foundation for making it possible to conduct what has been a truly amazing project. We've just posted all the resources and learning materials that we developed throughout this project. You can explore them on WebJunction through that short link there. We're also gauging interest from institutions, and it's not just public, so academics, others who would be interested in having this training for their staff. We're thinking about compressing it to about more like a 4-week course that we could do online. So if that's something that you're interested in for your staff, let me know. You can also send me an email, which I have up here on the slide. We are in the middle of a 3-part webinar series on user-centered assessment and evaluation, and this series is bringing together research and practice from across library sectors to cover the ins and outs of creating assessments that provide useful, actionable data. This includes figuring out what information you need for an effective assessment or applying your findings. The webinar is featuring experts who are teaching how to evaluate your programs and services in a way that helps you meet the evolving needs of your users, and to make the case for how the library plays a really important role in either your academic or public community. This series is designed for public, academic, and research library staff who either have never worked with data before or have some experience but need a refresher, or would like to really understand how to leverage assessment data to better benefit their library. So we had the first webinar in this series in April. We recorded it. It's available for anybody to view for free on Web Junction. You can head on over there and you'll find it in our course catalog. Part 2 is coming up this summer, and it will be presented by, again, my colleague Lynn Conaway of OCLC Research, as well as Linda Hofshire, who's the Director of Library Research Service at Colorado State Library. And the final part will be this fall, so you want to save that date. You can just register by heading over to Web Junction, or again, another smart link for you to head to use. I also want to mention for members of the Research Library Partnership, there is a library assessment interest group, and that's been organized from members of those institutions, and these folks are having facilitated discussions in between these sessions. As you see, they're spread out over 6 months or so, and that's just to reinforce their learning and think about how they can apply it in their institutions. Okay, also this spring in March, OCLC, in partnership with ALA's Office for Library Advocacy and the Public Library Association, we published an update to OCLC's seminal research study from a decade ago, From Awareness to Funding. And this studies current voter perceptions, use, and attitudes towards the library staff, and most critically for library funding. This new research was again conducted by the national marketing research firm Leo Burnett, USA, and so that was designed, and it was designed to allow for comparisons from today to a decade ago. So I encourage you to read the whole report. I've got a little infographic here that's available in the back of the room that has just some snapshots from the national results. But some findings are that a majority of U.S. voters believe that public libraries are essential to communities and also a source of civic pride. Voters still highly value those traditional library services, such as free access to books and quiet areas. However, increasingly they view the public library as a community hub. There is a disconnect between the services libraries offer and public awareness and support for those services. So more people are not aware of all the new and things that are happening at their library. And while a majority of voters are likely to support library funding at the local ballot box, fewer are committed to definite support than they were a decade ago. And then finally, a majority of voters still do not know that most library funding comes from local revenue sources. So even if you don't work in a public library, I really encourage you to read through the full report, because I really think it has implications for any institution. Okay, and now the Research Library Partnership is continuing to host guest speakers on key issues in our field. These are attended live at our Dublin headquarters and also live streamed for anyone else to watch. The recordings are also available to watch, and we are in the process of adding links and resources to guide your viewing. Over the past year, we've had some really fantastic presentations, and the viewership has been phenomenal. These speakers have included, most recently, Melissa Levine, who's lead copyright officer at the University of Michigan Library, and she talked about copyright. And then before that was Char Booth, who is Associate Dean of the University Library at California State University, San Marcos, and her talk was for the greater, not good enough, open access and information privilege. Really good things for us to think about. And before that was Dr. Kimberly Kristen, who's director of so many programs, director of the Digital Technology and Cultural Program, director of Digital Projects for Native American Programs, and co-director for the Center for Digital Scholarship and Curation, all at Washington State University. And her talk was "We Have Never Been Neutral, Search, Discovery, and the Politics of Access." Also an excellent talk. I encourage you to follow the link to check it out. Our next DSS event is scheduled for November 14th, and our seminar speaker will be Dame Rosie Stevenson Goodnight, who is a Wikipedia editor who is noted for her attempts to address gender disparity in the encyclopedia by running a project to increase the quantity and quality of women's biographies. And up on the screen here are several ways to stay tapped into what's happening at OCLC Research, virtually and in person. So before I turn it over to Andrew, I just wanted to see if there's any questions about that drive-by that I just did or about research in general. Okay, great. Then I will introduce Andrew.
Thanks, Sharon. That was a great overview. I'm going to do a slightly deeper dive. I'm curious, folks, everybody's probably heard the phrase linked data. There's probably a lot of well-initiated linked data people. I am going to be giving some a much sort of geekier overview of what we're doing in some of our latest projects. So to do that, I'm just going to do the sort of journalistic approach of the why, who, what, and how. Probably a slightly different order, but it's a way to bring you up to speed with what we've been doing lately. You're probably all familiar with the Gartner hype curve, that peak of inflated expectations, which is followed by a trough of disillusionment, the slope of enlightenment, and the plateau of productivity. And I think where we were a couple of years ago when we started our work in linked data was in that sort of peak of expectations. But where we fell last year as we were talking to libraries was that trough of disillusionment. How can I talk about this with my administration? How can I prove the worthwhileness of linked data projects to my catalogers or to my folks that are working with end users? So our hope was that in 2018 we could start to climb the slope of enlightenment and maybe in another year or so get to that plateau of productivity. And since I have sometimes also been accused of self-aggrandizing craftiness, I put myself in the role of Sisyphus, trying to push this ball of linked data up that slope and hope that it doesn't roll back on me when we get there. Generally what we're trying to do is sort of envision how we move into the future, moving from this version of today of where we're simplified searching, copy cataloging, original cataloging, and authority work, and try to envision what that looks like in the future. Is there an amplified way that we can search the data that we have access to? Can we add relationships between data that we couldn't do in a MARC environment? How do we manage the entities in a linked data environment? And what do we do with all those library-sourced vocabularies that are out there in either authorized or linked data or completely free text? So we put together a little vision statement for the group that we were trying to get involved in this project, which was to work with our members through a foundational shift in the collaborative work of libraries, communities of practice, and end users, dramatically improving our efficiency, embracing the inclusive, diverse, and earnest OCLC membership, and empowering a new and trusted knowledge network enabled by the web. And notice that we got through that vision statement without using the words linked data or entities at all. So we started with two partners, Cornell University and the University of California at Davis. The other thing that we were trying to do that was a little bit different than some projects we'd done in the past was engage right away with the different divisions at OCLC. I realize it's a little bit of inside baseball about how OCLC is organized, but we wanted the folks in research to work much more closely with our product management colleagues and also our production technology colleagues so that we could all work together throughout this project so that we weren't just sort of putting this really, really great idea together or building like a little vanity project and throwing it over the wall and hoping that it could be put into production. As we got through the first phase of the project with Cornell and Davis, they were great, and we built a list of about 14 or 15 other libraries that we wanted to work with on this project, thinking that a handful of them might agree. And we were thrilled when all of them basically said yes. We wanted to be involved. So this was our first indication that we could climb out of that trough of disillusionment. If none of the libraries had said that they were interested in this linked data project, then we might have been concerned that we could move forward on this. So this phase 2 setup group will be working with us through the fall, September 18. So some more details about how and what we're actually doing. When we talked to those initial groups, what we heard was that they really needed three things. They wanted a way to better explore the data, they wanted a better way to reconcile linked data, and they wanted a way to create, mint, or edit actual entities. So a lot of the linked data environments that were out there, you could see the linked data, but there was no way to add something or change something. So we wanted to build an ecosystem that was capable of that and build a community of users to try those things out. This is the picture of what it looks like, an entity ecosystem and associated services to reconcile names for people, organizations, concepts, places, and events against an index based on entities, returning language tagged headings and persistent identifiers to create, share, and edit those descriptions as well. The thing that we did slightly differently in other linked data projects that we'd done before was to use the VIAF headings. We started with the VIAF headings in the Virtual International Authority file that also had entries in Wikidata. So that was our way of assuring that we could start with a high-quality data set. And as we've progressed forward, we've tried to add some things about works, creative works, which you'll hear a lot more about from Karen. So a little bit about the technology that we use. These are the fun projects that we used: MediaWiki, WikiBase, OpenRefine, Sparkle, and PyWikibot. I'm going to talk a little bit more about each of those. But first, I thought it's worthwhile to disambiguate Wiki. Wiki is used as shorthand for a lot of sort of wiki things. So there is Wikipedia, which you've heard about already today, a multilingual, web-based free content encyclopedia. There is MediaWiki, which is an open source wiki software platform. There's Wikidata, which is the collaboratively edited structured data set used by WikiMedia sister projects and others. And then there's WikiBase, a MediaWiki extension to store and manage structured data. So in order to get started very quickly on this project, we chose to start with MediaWiki and WikiBase as the technologies that were already out there that gave us a lot of out-of-the-box data and a lot of out-of-the-box functionality. So if you see with MediaWiki, so if you've ever set up a wiki site, you might have used MediaWiki. The things that distinguish MediaWiki from MediaWiki with WikiBase is that you get a structured editor and a linked data Sparkle endpoint that you can query with the data that's in there. So the advantages of using WikiBase for this project were that it's open source, it's an all-purpose data model that already does a lot of things like translations and things like that. It's collaborative, and it included some version history. So as we were experimenting with the data, we could actually track the changes that go into it. So underneath your chairs will be a linked data buzzword bingo card for you for the next portion. No, I'm kidding. There's not actually a card under there. Some very disappointed looking faces out there that they didn't get their bingo card. So it did require that we look at some new vocabulary. So I know this is probably an eye chart for the back of the room, but this is Amelia Earhart's wiki entry. So you see all these sort of new ideas. If you're a cataloger, you could probably find some sort of equivalent label for the kinds of work going on here. but we needed to create a URL for it, a label, descriptions for it, aliases, properties, rank statements, and claims about this thing. So it has sort of a cataloging feel when you sort of approach the Wikidata entry for that. But let me give you a couple of examples of the use cases that we were doing. The first was using Wiki as that manual entry. So in this example, there's a date. So I want to give somebody a death date or a birth date. Wikidata does things like determine what calendar I want to use. It normalizes the format of the date. There's no sort of rule on the side or on a piece of paper next to me that does that, so it does that automatically. Here's an example with Jane Austen where she actually has 2 different death dates, and one of them was an error. So the second entry you see for that death date is actually deprecated. There's a little, there's an arrow and a thing where you can say this is actually a misprint from an encyclopedia from this year, and that her preferred death date is the one that you see on top there. If I change that death date, then I get all the WikiMedia sort of things that let me allow to track changes. So if you've ever edited a Wikipedia article, if you've ever edited a wiki page, you get that track changes so you can see who did what to the record that was there. Another really nice feature was that you get the sort of out-of-the-box autocompletes. So whether it's in WikiMedia or whether it's in our Sparkle queries, as you type, it's searching that linked data and allowing you to do autocompletes on the fly. We get the same thing from that Sparkle endpoint. So here's an example. So a lot of people might be familiar with SQL, right? I want that SQL access to my database, to my relational database. Sparkle can achieve a very similar kind of thing. So we asked a question just as a test case to say, well, what can I actually query this Sparkle endpoint with linked data that I might not have been able to do with Mark? So the example here is actually a query that says, show me every name, person name in the linked data for people that have a birth date between 1800 and 1880, but don't have a death date, right? Those people are probably dead or have really good genes. So now I can go in and I can actually augment that data and fix those death dates. So that's the kind of thing that would have been very, very difficult to do with a pile of Mark records. So that's just one example. I like to say that one of the cool things about linked data is that it lets you answer questions that you didn't even know to ask. We also were interested in reconciliation. So as data comes in, how do I reconcile it with other data points that are in there already? We don't want duplicate records. We don't want duplicate entries for all of those names, whether it's a person name or concept name. Why did we choose Open Refine? We chose it because it's popular, powerful, and ubiquitous in this environment. It might not be commonly used with those managing Mark data, so it was something for us to learn a little bit more about. And here's, again, another eye chart, but I can just type in the word Austen and start to reconcile. Am I looking at the city? Am I looking at the author name? Different spellings, and I can start to reconcile the data that comes in. The other, of course, thing that is of strong interest to OCLC is the putting of data into the system. So what do we do with batch loading? So we wanted to use this PyWikibot, which was an experiment, and I'll talk about that again in a second. Let me grab my water, Sharon. So since I know some people will appreciate a visual version of this, and again, I'm sorry if it's a little bit hard to read, but I wanted to give a pictorial view of all those pieces and parts that I just walked through. Okay? So we have the MediaWiki platform and its WikiBase extensions. That provides the relational database for storing structured data. As structured data is created, updated, and deleted, the text index is updated as part of that as well, so we have to put a simple index up there. The suite of MediaWiki APIs support all the authentication, authorization, search, and retrieval. So that's sort of the piece that goes around that relational database. And the WikiBase UI was our default UI interface for working with our partners. And I'll talk a little bit more about UI in a second. Then separate from the MediaWiki WikiBase is the RDF triple store and Sparkle Query API. This is where we're able to query the native linked data triples. And then you could put a UI in front of that so that we could actually search all that data in the examples that I already gave. Then we wanted to experiment with actually creating a different kind of interface. We found that the out-of-the-box WikiBase UI wasn't necessarily very good for looking at something like Creative Works and all of their translations. And I don't want to steal any of Karen's thunder, so I'll let her. So I'll let her show you all the beautiful screenshots of those kinds of things. And then OpenRefine was the reconciliation tool that I already mentioned. Then we could start to look at all of the ingest capabilities. So we started with PyWikibot to put entity data into ingest. We actually got some data from one of the partners who said, we have this set of entity data. Can we load it into the ecosystem that we've created? And then we can start to experiment with some other things. Wikidata quick statements is a recently developed alternative to PyWikibot. And there are other bots that will be evaluated too for actually ingesting more data into the system. So that's for people that like pictures more than words for that kind of thing. So what have we learned so far? Some lessons that we've learned: that the MediaWiki API wasn't really sufficient for reconciliation. That's why we went to OpenRefine. That the prototype data model for dates is capable but not very user-friendly. So as we were looking at UI, so this was very informative for our technology production teams that wanted to look at building different kinds of interfaces to this data. Auto-suggest doesn't always work very well when you have names that are inverted. We always know that problem with names in order, names that are inverted with a comma. We needed new ways to handle creative works and translations, which you'll hear from Karen about. And then the big question was, will this scale? So the Wikidata environment has about 45 million entities in it. So when we think about putting WorldCat into an entity environment, 45 million would be a very, very small percentage of what the Virtual International Authority file or the FAST subject terms or WorldCat in general would represent. So we've had some really good conversations that have been ongoing with the WikiMedia Deutschland group about how to scale up this environment, and it's been a very fruitful partnership with them. We've had lots of very fruitful partnerships with those folks. They're really good. What's our strategy for engagement with those 16 libraries that you saw? So we've been doing regularly scheduled webinars with all of those library partners. If you're familiar with the OCLC Community Center, so this is a product engagement space that OCLC has. It's got several thousand users in there where they can talk about various products and services from OCLC, if it's WorldShare ILL or WorldShare Management Services. So we set up a little private group in which we could provide a project overview and news postings and list of participants and discussions. It's a way to scale what we try to do on listservs, but listservs don't scale very well. It's a hard way to have a conversation. So this has been really fruitful. And then we've been giving folks treasure hunts. So this is the way we make people do homework, right? So here's what we want you to try to do with the system. Create an entity, edit a date, do something and play with that. We had a little gathering of some of the partners that were here at ALA last night, and one of them said the treasure hunt part and the weekly office hours, which is our last piece, is the most fun part of my week. So that was a nice sort of level of praise for this project, to say he didn't want to go back to his old cataloging environments after playing this new environment. And then we do weekly office hours where OCLC staff and any of the participants who want to get on a WebEx, and we actually just use the interfaces. We use the prototype together, walk through adding a photograph. What does it mean if I want to describe entities for cartographic materials or for films? So that's been really fun as we sort of work together as we go through this. I think the working with the partners has been the most rewarding part of this project. We would not have thought of all of the use cases that libraries were going to encounter. We would not have thought of all the questions that people were going to have. And so it actually leads us to, when you're trying to do something in a production environment, we can answer a lot of those questions ahead of time and not have to be guessing at some of those answers. So next steps, and then I'll wrap up and hand things over to Karen to sort of do a deeper dive of an actual tangible thing that we can do with this linked data. We're working towards a September code freeze on the prototype, so we've been sort of coding all along as we go to deal with these use cases, and we've now ranked the use cases that came in from the partners. They wanted better indexing, they wanted batch loading of new entities, so people want to give us data and see how it feeds into this ecosystem, enhanced searching and editing, and then some details around the reference resources when you actually update things within the data set. Our office hours for the next few weeks, or about the next month probably, will be focusing on digital collections. So what's it like to create entities for photographs, for maps, for cultural heritage materials in libraries. That particular area in libraries is really anxious because most of the systems that they have don't have a lot of authority control in them. So rather than try to create a new version of authority control for these collections, we see some opportunity in going straight into a linked data environment. And then finally, and most importantly, and I was trying to predict what one of the big questions might be, is when will all of this be real? Is to work with those technology and product colleagues, some of whom are here today, to develop and design a plan to transition the prototype services to a fully scaled production environment. So as I said, those folks have been partners with OCLC Research all along, so it's been a really fruitful discussion. And we're very optimistic about putting some of these linked data services into full production so that libraries can start using them in their daily activities. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Karen. Since she's going to be doing sort of a deeper, tangible expression of some of the work we've done, we thought we would save questions on the linked data stuff until the end so she can have enough time to, and we should have some time to address some questions if you have any. So thank you.
And I am going to focus on one of the use cases following Andrew's presentation on the WikiBase prototype, specifically representing translations in WikiBase. It works. We've been focusing on the content that is most likely to be of interest to the most people, and that's translations. The cream of the world's cultural and knowledge heritage is shared by being translated. It's how we learn about other cultures, and it's about how cultures learn about us. So for developers, it's an opportunity to present information in the language and script of the user, and for academics, it's to better understand information sharing across cultures. Now, 7% of the written works represented in WorldCat have been translated into at least one other language. This is what I call the short head, as opposed to the long tail of works that have potentially the most impact on readers worldwide. So I've listed a few titles here. Some are classicals, some classic works, some written by Nobel Prize laureates of literature, but they're in the original language and the script. So likely you've all heard of all or most of them, right? Well, probably. Some might be, yeah. In most audiences, they can read maybe one or two. The CJK people have the advantage of being able to read two of them. But no, you're probably most likely familiar with the English translations of those titles in this particular audience. So we've done some modeling about how to represent works and their translations. This is a sort of simplified model representing some of the translations of Heidegger's Sein und Zeit, along with a few key properties. Each translation has a translation of work relationship to the original German work, and those are indicated by the red arrows. There can be multiple translations into the same language. In this case, we've shown two Korean translations, one with Hangul only and one with Hangul and Hanja, published in different years and with different translators, and the earlier translation actually has two translators. We've identified 570 translations in 33 languages for Heidegger's Sein und Zeit und WorldCat. So we translated that diagram into what we consider a desired minimum set of statements in the WikiBase prototype that Andrew just talked about. So for works, the original title, the language of the original title, the instance is always a book, in this case, authors of the original, earliest known publication date. Then for translations, title, the translated title, and when I say that the translated title in the original script, the language of the translation, the instance is always a translation, translators, very important, earliest known publication date, and of course, translated from, so we can do some searches to bring together all the translations together. I wrote the wrong arrow. So this gives a sort of quick overview of our process. The input is a combination of Wikidata descriptions and parsing statements from WorldCat gold descriptions of translated works. I'll explain what I mean by gold in a little while. This input, this combination, is then put into our prototype, and it's the entity store that what my colleague Jeff Young says, a place to put stuff. But it's nice and it's structured, and it means it can be subject to all kinds of different queries that can lead to new knowledge and ideas for refining our data model. Or, as Andrew just pointed out, it also helps us identify errors that need to be corrected. For example, in my case, a date of publication for a translation that's earlier than the work it was translated from. Yeah. It's an error, people. So we rely on the metadata in WorldCat to identify translations of works. We rely on the metadata you guys and all your colleagues create. It's really, really important. But it's often not easy. So in this first record, I know you can't see it very well, but it's an Italian translation of Sein und Zeit. But it has no indication of what the original language was. It doesn't show what the original title was. And it incorrectly gives Chiodi, the translator, as a role of author. But fortunately, we have another record, the Gold Star record here, that is for a later Italian translation, but it shows the original language. It shows that it is a translation of Sein und Zeit, the original title, and it correctly identifies Chiodi as the translator, not the author. This is what I'm referring to as the quote-unquote gold standard. Now, as long as some of the WorldCat records are full like this, then we can infer from the ones that don't have that information that they have the same type of properties. So as long as you guys do some really good records, we can leverage them. But unfortunately, there are lots of records in WorldCat for translations that lack that information completely. And that's where it comes into play to take more information from other third-party sources like Wikidata. So, what did I do? Here we go. So this is the result of a Sparkle query on all of the WikiBase entities that are translations of Sein und Zeit. They share the common statement translated from. They are all translated from Sein und Zeit. I chose to display them as a timeline with the statements for language, language of the translation, the translated title, the translators, and the date. The 4 that I circled here are all Japanese translations, each by a different translator. When language are as different as Japanese and German are, there can be very marked differences in the translations, which is why it's so crucial to identify the respective translators. So currently there are over 30 million records in WorldCat with non-Latin scripts in 34 languages. But 76% of them are for Chinese, Japanese, Korean. 29 non-Latin script languages combined total only 1% of the total. Romanization only predominates in WorldCat records for most languages written in non-Latin scripts. And 2 of those languages are Greek and Persian. WorldCat has records for these translations of Sein und Zeit, which we saw on the previous slide, but only in Romanization. The 2 entries we saw from that search result have Greek and Persian scripts because we ingested them from Wikidata. So Wikipedia does have these kind of information cards for Sein and Zeit in different languages, and that information is also represented in Wikidata, which also has things like what it was translated from, the original publication date, and sometimes even translators. But it also has a long list of multilingual labels for Sein and Zeit in Wikidata. So we not only can include, like in the Greek example, the Greek script, but we can do a query of WorldCat for all of those languages and sometimes pick up translations in WorldCat where they didn't say what the original title was. Because we can infer from Wikidata's list of multilingual labels with pretty high confidence that these are indeed translations of the work. Cool, huh? Well, you think that's cool. As much fun as querying the WikiBase is, you know, in different types of things and answering questions you didn't know you had, the really exciting potential is on discovery. And my colleague Bruce Washburn created this discovery layer for the WikiBase prototype. It brings together the statements about Sein and Zeit, original work, and the translations we saw on that timeline that are associated with it, but also brings in data from other sources. In this case, the title page from Wikimedia Commons and a description about being in time from DBpedia. And if you click on the Martin Heidegger link in that previous one, you also get a photo of Heidegger and a summary of his philosophy. So the work is demonstrating the value of taking advantage of other linked data resources to enrich our own data sets. We see a mutual benefit between WorldCat and Wikidata. Our next steps is to create an automatic classifier that takes MARC records and to identify whether a record represents a translation or not, bulk error detections and corrections, and bulk harvesting of Wikidata creative works linked to Wikipedia pages. And representing translations in WikiBase is also part of our multilingual bibliographic structure project described on the OCLC Research website, and we also post updates on our Hanging Together blog. And that's it for me. And now we're ready for questions.